Who did that to you?
You dead? They were worried about the lice, maybe. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We're going to start in about 1 minute, inshallah. So if you guys come to your seats, please. All right. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I begin in the name of Allah. I invoke His peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I ask Allah to extend His blessings to the Prophet's family and his descendants, his companions and his followers, and all the men and women that walk in their footsteps. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among them. Allahumma ameen. Jazakumullah khairan for joining us tonight. This is the Tafseerah program. And in the Tafseerah program, we study the commentary on the Quran in the order of revelation and not in the order of collection. And so we study the surahs as they were revealed in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, hence the word Tafseerah. We combine the two words, Tafsir and Seerah, together so that we study the seerah as we study the surahs when they were revealed. Tonight, inshallah, we cover Surah Al-Nazi'at. This is the second surah in the 30th juz of the Quran. And Surah Al-Nazi'at is not unique in the sense that it follows the general themes and guidelines of all the surahs of the 30th juz in general. You know, very short ayat, very poignant, very piercing, speak directly to the heart, intended to cause a convulsion in the soul, to wake people up, to slap people on the face. The ayat of all the surah, of all the verses of Juz Am, the 30th Juz in the Quran, are focused on life and death, are focused on the resurrection, as we will see, are focused on life after death, building the system of creed, the aqidah of the Muslim, building his moral character, consequences of moral action, heaven and hell, and so on and so forth. This is basically the overall theme of Meccan Quran, but it's emphasized so clearly in the surahs of the 30th juz in particular. Surah Al-Nazi'at, which is the surah that we will discuss tonight, inshallah, is primarily focused on the concept of resurrection, the concept of al-ba'th, which is, as we said before, it is the understanding of the Muslims, it is the ideology of the Quran, that the human soul is timeless, and that while this soul occupies this vehicle in this world that is called al-jasad, the body, the human body, death is not an end. Rather, death describes the separation between the soul and the physical body. And if you guys remember from last time, I said that there is a sort of a glue that is needed for the soul and the physical body to stay together. And once that glue is removed, the separation takes place. Anyone remembers what that glue was? There's a word in the Quran that describes the glue that binds the physical body with a nafs, the soul, right? Anybody remembers? Ruh, thank you. Yes. The Ruh. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. They ask you about Ruh. Tell them this is from the affairs of my Lord. I have no idea what that is. All we know is that it is this mysterious energy of life that binds the soul with the physical body. And once Ruh, once the spirit, I guess the word spirit in English would be the proper word to translate it. Once it's removed, a separation takes place between nafs and jasad, between the soul and the physical body. And it is, again, I said that it's the Quranic ideology that once that separation takes place, the soul returns back to its maker, returns back to its creator. Whether or not it assumes another physical body in the afterlife, is yet to be determined. There are indications in the Quran that it does, and that we will experience the physicality of it. On the other hand, we also know that the afterlife is not physical in the sense that we understand the physical world. It is beyond the space-time continuum, as I said before. So anything that we understand about the hereafter needs to be understood in that regard and with that spirit. Okay, it's all approximations. Space, as we know it, the 3D space that we have here in this world, the passage of time as we experience in this world, none of this will apply to the afterlife. And so it's a different realm of existence. It's a different domain of existence that is not bound by any temporal or spatial limitations that we experience in this dunya. So ba'ath, resurrection, essentially, with all of this in mind, resurrection, is when that soul is basically brought back to consciousness and is now being readied to stand account before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is now being readied to be held to account, to be judged for the actions that were performed in this dunya. Surah Al-Nazi'at attempts throughout, as we will see together inshallah, to offer these vivid descriptions, these very poignant words, in order to engender a certain feeling in the heart. And that feeling is that everything that we consider today to be predictable, everything that we are familiar with today, everything that is taken for granted today will cease to be so once the day of judgment actually starts. The predictability of the physical world, the physical laws, the passage of time, the occupation of space, the predictability of the cosmic systems and how they move and so forth, all of that will cease to exist. And that comes with uncertainty. And that uncertainty yields some fear. And this fear keeps you alert. And those are all very healthy things. Okay? So Surah Al-Nazi'at attempts to achieve that wake-up call. People who are so used to the passage of time, they're so used to the occupation of space, they're so used to predictability, they're so used to systems, they're so used to, I'll do this tomorrow and I'll do this, the day after, and next month I have this plan, and next year I have that plan. These human beings that take life for granted, they know deep inside that they are all mortal beings, but they act as if they are immortal. They act with the assumption that they are immortal, thinking that we're going to live forever, right? And so Surah Al-Nazi'at, as its name suggests, attempts to, or endeavors to extract man from the assumptions that are taken for granted every single day. And Nazi'at comes from naza'. Naza' is the forcible extraction of something, right? You're asleep, in a dream, and then someone really comes, slaps you as hard as possible across the face, and you wake up to a fire, literally, that is about to burn your doorstep. Okay, so suddenly you shed the sleepiness and you shed the delusions that you were in, and you wake up to that reality. So Surah Al-Nazi'at attempts to extract man from all that is familiar, from all that is predictable, in order to engender in the heart a deep understanding of the resurrection, of al-Ba'th. We see three questions that we will come across in the surah. Ayah number 15, هل أتاك حديث موسى? A question, have you heard of the tales or the story of Musa? Ayah number 27, أأنتم أشد خلقا أم السماء? Do you think that your creation is more complex than the creation of the universe? And ayah number 42, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ السَّاعَةِ. They ask about the hour. And inshallah ta'ala, I will address those questions as they come up. Now, one of the other things that I said before multiple times is that there are prophetic stories in the Quran, and those prophetic stories are quite ubiquitous, and they're mentioned, across the board. What is the most commonly cited prophetic story in the Quran? Exactly. It's the story of Musa alayhi salam, with or without Fir'aun. Sometimes Fir'aun is mentioned, sometimes he's not mentioned, but definitely the story of Musa, Prophet Moses. His story is the most widely cited story in the Quran. 30 plus times is mentioned. However, every single time the story of Musa is mentioned in the Quran, it is mentioned in a manner that is conducive to the theme of that surah. There is a component of the story that serves the theme of the surah. Okay? And so, for the uninitiated, they might actually look at the surah as, oh, interesting, another mention of Musa. But if you understand the purpose of the surah and the timing of its revelation, and if you understand its theme, then the actual details of the prophetic story will make sense. And why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected these particular details, mentioned them here, while in other surahs such details were not mentioned, right? And so the story is a story, and the story is basically a series of anecdotes. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selects the proper anecdotes and inserts them in the surah depending on the theme of that surah and what the story is supposed to serve. The purpose that the story is supposed to serve. So we will come across the story of Musa alayhi salam in one of its most summarized, perhaps its shortest iteration in the Quran. Okay, this incredibly long story that is mentioned, sometimes so extensively in the Quran, is mentioned in only 10 very short, poignant ayat in Surat An-Nazi'at, as we will see inshallah for a very particular reason. So let's jump right into it. Ayah number 1, وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. Now, when we see the wow before the word, then we automatically realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing what? This is qasam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking an oath upon an object of sorts. Now, I also said before that when human beings take an oath upon something, we always select objects that are very sublime, that are very high, right? And so when someone says, I swear on my son's life, it's because every person loves their own kids a lot more than themselves, right? And so, I cannot take an oath upon, a mediocre object. I cannot say, I take an oath upon my glasses. People are not going to take my oath seriously because they'll think, are you kidding? You'll get other glasses. Who cares, right? So I'm not going to be making a convincing argument to my listener unless I take an oath upon something that is universally accepted to be most sublime or most valuable, right? And so that's why we, as Muslims, we're supposed to take an oath only upon the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? It's against the sunnah to take an oath upon your mom, upon your most valuable possessions. I swear by my Jaguar, I'll do this or I'll do that. Like, you're not supposed to take any oaths upon anything except the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you're basically making a statement that the name of God is the most sublime. There's nothing like Him. Therefore, if I were to swear, if I were to take an oath, then I would take an oath upon the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, when Allah takes an oath upon something, He is the greatest. So on what basis does He take an oath upon objects? Most of the scholars say it be one of two reasons. It's either that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses an object that is known to us, to be a great object, such as the stars, mawaqi' al-nujum, the location of the stars, stuff like that. Or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath upon an object that is meant to be emphasized as great. Right? And so, if I say, وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Najm takes an oath by the star. وَالنَّجْمِ. Okay? And so here, the star is known for us to be this brilliant object in the night sky, millions of light years away. It has like a greatness in our minds. But then in another surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say, فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِمَوَاقِعِ النُّجُومِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath upon the location of the stars, not the stars themselves. What's the difference between those two? One, Allah takes an oath upon an object that is already known to be great. Okay. The other one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasizes the greatness that may be, not apparent for us or to us. Okay. مواقع النجوم وإنه لقسم لو تعلمون عظيم. Allah says, that is an oath. If you only knew, that is one of the greatest oaths ever. Why? Because it is nearly impossible for us to know the actual location of the star. In fact, it is impossible for us to know if the star even still exists or not, because for all practical purposes, maybe we're just seeing the light that was emanated from that star, millions of years ago, and maybe the star is not really here anymore, or maybe the star moved, somewhere else. Constellations are constantly moving, all right? And so maybe the star that we see like in Andromeda today, or whatever of the Orion or any of those constellations that you see in the night sky, maybe they've already moved, but it'll be more millions of years, for us to actually know that they moved. Okay? And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I take an oath upon the actual position of the star, only because He's the only one that may have such knowledge. There is absolutely no human means with our technology that would enable us to go past the speed of light. Therefore, we just have to wait. We have to wait for, the new position to reveal itself and for the light to arrive and to reach us, and that's when we know where the star is. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. Now, if I were to ask you, the rough translation here, is the extractors. I swear by the extractors that are so keen in their extraction. Okay? And I know this is not the translation that you read in your apps, and I will tell you why I'm not using the one that you're reading. Okay? But it says, I swear by those that extract so keenly. Which one would this be? Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swearing upon something that we already know is great, or something whose greatness needs to be emphasized? One or two? Right? It has to be two. Because it is all mysterious anyway. We don't even know what that is. So it is almost as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing our attention in the direction of something that is not known for us, but Allah wants to emphasize its greatness to us. Okay? وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. And I said, النَّازِعَات, the ones that extract forcibly. النَّزْعَ is forcible extraction of something, right? And so this is something that you either do to somebody else, this is a little bit of Arabic tidbit. It's either you do this to somebody else, right? نَزْعَ الْحَيَاةِ, for example. If you take someone else's life, right? Then you've extracted that life out of that person. Or naza'a, you extracted yourself, let's say, from a difficult situation. So it's either that I do it to someone or I do it myself. وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. And the word غَرْقًا is also very interesting because it comes from مُغْرِق. When we say someone مُسْتَغْرِقٌ فِي النَّوْمِ, that means what? That person is so, fast asleep, is so keenly asleep. All right? So the word غَرَق, essentially means to drown in something, right? Al-ghariq is the person that drowns. And so when you're surrounded by water from every direction, that is gharq, okay? If you are inundated with something, let's say gharqan fil mal, someone who is inundated with wealth, who's drowning in wealth, right? Someone is inundated with blessings, okay? So we have this secondary usage of the word in the Arabic language. And so as we say that something or someone is inundated by something, sometimes we also use the word in a slightly different sense, but they're all derivatives of each other. When we say, that you are so, because you're so surrounded by the object, you are so keenly engaged in what you're doing, right? غارق في أفكاره, for example. Someone مستغرق في الفكر. In Arabic we say, someone who's so engaged and lost in their own thought. That person is thinking about something so keenly that they disconnect from everyone else and they are so involved in their own thought, right? So what is it? وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. Who are those extractors that are so keen about what they're doing? They're so focused on what they're doing, they're not paying attention to anything else. And here's what the scholars said about this. They said that this is a reference to the angels that will come, towards the end of one's life in order to come and extract your soul. Well, essentially, they extract the ruh, the spirit. They take the energy of life away from you, and that's when the soul and the body separate from each other. Okay, could work. This could definitely work. And actually, if you follow the remaining descriptions in the first 5 ayat, and nashitati nashta, right? They are constantly moving steadily in motion, right? Ayah number 3 was sabihati sabaha. They're constantly gliding, right? In a very serene manner, or floating in a serene manner. فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. They overtake each other as if there's a race. They're moving with different speeds, disparate speeds. فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا. Right? In ayah number 5, they fulfill their creator's behest. They fulfill their creator's mandate. All that could apply well to angels. And the majority of the scholars actually said that this is a reference to angels that will come to us, and they are moving fast. They are keen. They know what they're doing. They have the roster. Everyone's name is on it, and they're going and extracting people's souls. Right? Al-Asfahani, however, who was a linguist, and I said before that we most of us always read the tafsir of the Quran from the commentators, from the classical commentators. So you read Ibn Kathir, you read Tabari, Qurtubi, whatever. I'm a big fan of Qurtubi myself, right? And I think that Qurtubi is an incredible, mufassir, because Al-Qurtubi lived in an environment that is not very different from ours, right? Al-Qurtubi lived in Muslim Spain. He was surrounded by Jews and Christians, very diverse society, very technologically advanced. I always favor Qurtubi's opinions and positions, at the expense sometimes of Tabari or Ibn Kathir, who are the fathers of this art, right? But all of these guys, at the end of the day, they're classical commentators. They look at the history, they look at the context, right? They connect the ayat with each other, they look at the ahadith, right? And what Ibn Abbas said, and what Ibn Mas'ud said, and so on and so forth. Zamakhshari and Qatada and Al-Asfahani, some of the other scholars, on the other hand, were linguists. They come from the language art, okay? And so they give less attention to the historical context, and they look at the actual usage of the Arabic words in the Quran versus how they're used in the language. Now let me ask you this question. If you examine the Quran in general, does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refer to the angels in the feminine? In fact, the Quran is critical of that idea. The Quran always said, the Arabs used to say, give all the female names to the angels, and they use that, as an excuse sometimes, to do, the crimes that they've committed against women and so forth. In fact, the overall patriarchy of the Arabs, the overall misogyny that they used to practice was actually often justified by the fact that, it's God that takes care of women, not us. Because all the angels are females, all the angels have female names. Let God love women. We don't need to love women. Let God love women type deal. Okay? So the Quran came to be critical of that idea. Why is it then that the Quran, literally in 5 ayat here, is using feminine or masculine descriptions of the angels? All feminine here. Okay? All feminine. And so some of these scholars, like I said, Al-Isfahani is the first one that pointed this out. And then Qatada, the great Mufassir himself, said, well, that's why I don't like the whole angels thing. I prefer, to argue that the 5 descriptions here are not about angels, rather they are about stars. That we're talking about stars and not angels. And let's try to read it with that in mind and see if it makes any sense. So 1 through 5 again. وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا, right? The stars may extract themselves from one position and then dip themselves into another position. It could actually work. Because gharq here means that it dipped itself or inundated itself in another position. In fact, Muhammad Asad's translation, he says, consider the stars that rise only to set. when you see our sun setting, by the ocean, what does it look like to us? That it's what? Drowning or dipping itself in the water, right? So the usage of the word gharqa would actually work here, right? That is interesting. وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا. Look at Asad's translation. He would say, and they move in their orbits with steady motion, right? So this could still work, right? A bit of a slight stretch, but it could still work. And again, in the interest of academic honesty, I always share with you, a couple of those opinions so that you're not stuck with only one. All right. So Qatada would say, "An-nashitati nashta" is about the cosmic systems and how they're constantly moving in, their orbits and so forth. Was-sabihati sabha, it looks like they're floating in this very serene manner because they're gliding so effectively and they're gliding so beautifully, right? فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا, and because some of them are moving faster than others, right? The moon versus the sun versus Mars versus Venus, versus other stars. They're moving with a variety of speeds, okay? So it looks like some of them are overtaking others in a race, all right? فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا, ultimately, all of them are given a mandate by God. And they're moving on God's behest and on God's behalf. They're doing exactly what they're told to do. These are not random motions, not random things that they're doing, right? They're following the book, to the absolute letter, right? So even if you take Qatada's perspective on this, it still makes sense. And Qatada basically said, this is a surah that talks about resurrection. It's a surah that talks about challenging man's idea of what is predictable, of what is familiar, in order to show that the day of judgment will remove all this predictability, all this harmonious motions that you see in the universe around you will cease to be the case. And that's when the convulsions of the day of judgment will actually arrive. And so it still works, suitably with the theme of the surah if we understood it in that sense. So it's almost like, look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. If we follow Qatada's perspective, if we're not saying that these are the angels, like I said, if we're talking about angels, it would still work, right? And it would be like a very direct introduction into what the surah is trying to say. Day of judgment, angels are coming, taking your soul, boom, right? But if we follow Qatada's perspective, and the first 5 ayat are talking about the universe, and they're talking about the cosmic systems, it almost like, the silence that precedes the storm. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reels you into the surah with simple, nice descriptions. Oh, look at the universe, look at the stars, look at them, they're moving, they're so nice, they're so cute, in order to shock you with ayah number 6. Now that He showed you what you're familiar with, all the things that make sense to you, He shocks you with ayah number 6. You see all that is going to be transformed into something else, and you don't have no idea what it is. يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةُ. يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةُ. It is the day on which the violent convulsion will, convulse. الرَّاجِفَةُ is, الرَّجْف is something that shakes uncontrollably, right? That is rajf in Arabic. Rajifa is the object that convulses or shakes. So everything around you will shake. The very ideas will shake. The assumptions will shake. So that is basically, the opinion that I prefer. But obviously, you are more than welcome to enjoy the other perspectives as well. And I think there's a credited opinion to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud that the first 5 ayat basically talk about warriors. And that an-nazi'ati is basically when the arrow is extracted out of the bow, right? And so there is multiple ways of looking at this. The point is, again, if you understand the theme of the surah, the particulars won't really matter as much. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about is things that are familiar that will be followed by convulsion. What those familiar things are is less important. What matters is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying at some point all of your predictions will be challenged. All of your perspectives will be altered. Everything that you've always taken for granted will need to be changed and transform and take a different form, right? يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةُ. On that day, the violent convulsion will do what it does, which is, convulse. This is a piercing description. This is a violent description of the transformations of the world. Think of an upheaval. Think of an earthquake, right? Think of things that are shaking in both a metaphorical and a literal sense. Think of the great tumult, okay? And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks to you about these things in the Quran, again, if you are paying attention, if you are actually giving heed to the words, if you understand what they mean, if you try to get to the bottom of these words, the ayah number 6, will achieve its purpose. And that leave a lasting mark, a lasting impression on the heart. My youngest son, Radwan, always asks questions, even though, he's going to be 13 soon. But he always asks questions about the Day of Judgment. He's always obsessed with the Day of Judgment and the events of the Day of Judgment. And he's trying to make sense of it, scientifically. And he always asks questions about whether Dajjal is Trump or not. He's not in office anymore, and so I'm not sure if that particular theory is still valid, or whether Dajjal is actually real. And he keeps asking question about how the Antichrist, who is one-eyed, and it says kafir on his forehead, how that is not going to be recognizable today. How is it that people will follow something so corrupt and something that is so harmful? And I was like, judging by how things have been last 20 years, we're not surprised anymore. People are actually, taking leaps and bounds to follow the most harmful things, stated to be harmful. In their job description, they're harmful. It's disclosed. And we're evil, and you're not supposed to follow us, and people are following them by the hordes, right? Like back in the day, evil needs to masquerade as something else. Evil needed to pretend to be good, right? Needed to deceive people. Today, evil is actually pretty straightforward and is very honest about its mandate. And it tells you straight up, this is what I do, okay? All the definitions have been completely twisted. Oftentimes, I get Muslim youth who come to me and tell me they're subject to bullying at school because they excel. They're subject to bullying because they're getting straight A's. It's the most incredible thing. Like back in the day when I was a student, kids that are not performing well were subject to bullying, right? If you're not doing great at school, you're mocked, you're attacked, they're making fun of you. Now students that are doing extremely well, so you're the goody-goody. Because they're not yelling and cussing at the teachers, they're now being attacked. What's wrong with being a goody-goody? You used good twice. How is that a bad thing, right? How is being good to the power of 2 is a bad thing, yet we've made it into a bad thing, right? Back in the day, extramarital affairs or, premarital affairs or whatever were considered to be bad and looked down upon. Oh, ew, oh my God, this is disgusting. How could you do this, right? Today, those who don't do those things are looked down upon like there's absolutely something wrong with them, right? And so, when I was a kid, I used to read descriptions about Dajjal. I was like, how is it ever going to be possible for people to follow someone who explicitly tells them that he is the source of all evil, and there's kafir on his forehead? The last 20 years made it actually very possible when you understand how, right? And this is what some of the things that I keep saying to my son, and that is, the events of the Day of Judgment will bring to us, a host of challenges that will challenge, a host of threats that will challenge everything that we've known and take it for granted forever. And now we're going through the minor signs, and as the major signs start, Lord knows what else we're gonna see. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. And as I always say, inshallah, we live and die and never have to experience such terrifying times. Okay, as difficult as it is. Let our great-grandkids deal with Dajjal and Ya'juj and Ma'juj and all this stuff. I'm not sure if we're cut out for this, right? And so, the convulsions of the Day of Judgment, ayah number 6, يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةُ. And this convulsion will be followed by, more tremors, right? تَتْبَعُهَا الرَّادِفَةُ. As if the first one was not bad enough. it'll be followed by the second one. And many of the scholars say that the first one is the first blow in the horn, the second one is the second blow in the horn. You know, we don't know. But what the ayah is trying to tell us, it'll be one event after the other. It'll be one terrifying event after the other. تَتْبَعُهَا الرَّادِفَةُ. And it's the most interesting thing is that even in times like that, when literally people died and they were resurrected and they came out of their graves, look at ayah number 10. This is a question or a statement, or it's a question that is raised by people who were just resurrected. They just came out of their graves. Okay? يَقُولُونَ أَإِنَّا لَمَرْدُودُونَ فِي الْحَافِرَةِ. Wait a second. We're going to be restored and sent back to earth and sent back to our homes? Oh, this is so cool. They died, and then they spent some time in the grave, and they were resurrected. Okay, so you were resurrected at this point. Which is a more straightforward assumption? That the universe has a God, and God resurrected you in order to be held to account, or that there is some type of a scientific explanation for you being resurrected, and you can now comfortably go back to your home in Granite Bay. Because that's what they're saying, right? They're saying, أَإِذَا أَإِنَّا لَمَرْدُودُونَ فِي الْحَافِرَةِ أَإِذَا كُنَّا عِظَامًا نَخِرَةً. Wait a second. We thought that we were piles of bones. We were put back together, and we're going to go back to our homes. That's so interesting. Even then, they're not making any reference to God. They're not scared and saying, oh my God, God resurrected us. I've rejected God all my life. Oh my God, here we go. No. The obliviousness and the delusional behavior still reigns even then. You know, I watched recently a video, I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about. It was an interview on Bill Maher, and I really have a tremendous amount of dislike for this guy. One of the absolute most hypocritical liberals I've ever seen in my life, right? So he has, I think, Ben Affleck, and he has, Sam Harris and a couple other people. And if you don't know Sam Harris, the great prophet of the atheistic religion, that preaches his ideology every single day. One of the things that he said, so Ben Affleck was basically saying, you cannot judge 2 billion human beings, which is us, right? It's interesting. They're talking about us. And of course, the only one that has no representation on the table is always the Muslims. So everyone is just giving their opinion about us, but they never actually invite us to share our own views of what we do, who we are. So Ben Affleck is being very supportive, and this is ridiculous. You're liberals. You should know better. Attacking 2 billion people. You should be accommodating in your values. He's coming from the liberal perspective. Agree or disagree with it, but that's where he's coming from. And then Bill Maher shows a picture of a niqabi woman. And he talks about how France, banned niqab. And he says, I'm not for banning anything, but please, everyone, please, take a look at this picture. Look at this picture. There's got to be something wrong with this. There has to be something wrong with this. Now, mind you, this is coming from a liberal who presumably claims to accept everything, right? And that people have unfettered freedom to choose whatever it is, however lifestyle that they want to choose. Because a woman that lives in another culture chooses to cover herself in full, whether we think it's a religious obligation or not, that's a different story, but that's her personal choice, right? Who has any business telling a woman, what she's supposed to wear, right? Right? Wrong. Because they get into her business all the time. Look, I'm not for banning anything, but look at this. This gotta be wrong. She's not dressed right. How is she able to breathe? How can she see? And then Sam Harris, a great, scientific mind that rejects God based on, sound evidence, goes like, yeah, and the thing is, 99% of them are forced to do this. So I was like, dude, when you debate any group in the world, when you debate atheists, you're being careful. When you talk about Jews, you're being careful. When you talk about the LGBTQIA community, you're being careful. When you talk about the conservatives, you're being careful. And you always corroborate your statements with facts and citations and evidence. Only when it comes to the Muslims that they will summarily issue the most uncorroborated statements, and they always get away with it. It's the most astounding thing. I was watching this and just laughing at the level of stupidity. And then Sam Harris concludes the discussion by saying, Islam is the mother lode of all bad ideas. On national television. Islam is the mother lode of all bad ideas. There is not a single good idea. Did you read anything about the Islam? Okay, I get it. Maybe you'll come across a lot of ideas that may look bad to you. I understand that. But not a single good idea? Not one? Like, even the absolute most radical, the absolute most unreasonable or most unfair person would have the decency to acknowledge one or two good qualities. There's no way that an entire group of 2 billion people for 1,400 years have been following all bad ideas 100% of the time. There's no way. Right? It's just statistically impossible. Yet they get away with statements like this, the mother lode of all bad ideas. I mean, just looking at the Quran, there is no one good moral admonition in the Quran. Don't lie. The Quran says don't lie. That's not a good idea. At least, is there one good idea at least that we can acknowledge, right? And so people like that, they will be delusional to the end. Because they're not driven by evidence. When we talk about kufr, a lot of Muslims feel bad because, oh my God, kuffar, let's not call people kuffar because this is really like a loaded term, and let's be careful, let's not be judgmental, kufr is such a huge accusation, right? But dude, wait a second. We're talking about two different things here. We're not talking about people who are ignorant, who are struggling with the truth and trying to pursue and knocking on every door and going on every website and attending the Jewish service on Saturdays and the Mass on Sundays and coming to Jum'ah and reading online, trying to find about the truth their entire lives. I don't think those are kuffar. Not in the Quranic sense, at least. A kafir is someone like Sam Harris. Like I feel no shame calling a person like this kafir. Do you? I mean, every single definition of what kufr is applies to these guys. They're full of arrogance, full of themselves, reject the truth as it's presented to them, make false statements, absolutely lie to everyone, take advantage of simple-minded people, right? Be selective in the statements that they make, have no intention of reaching the truth whatsoever. That's the definition of kufr to me. And people like this will continue to be delusional even after they're resurrected, like literally. Died, went into their grave, a few thousand years later, God brought them back, and now they're alive, dusting off, and standing there after being a pile of bones, and then they will be like, there must be a scientific explanation for whatever it is that put us back together. And here we are, I'm going to go back to New York in order to go on Bill Maher one more time. As opposed to thinking, wait a second, what just happened right now? See what ayah is trying to do? The ayah is trying to, this ayah is an exposition of stupidity. It is showing you, how people, when they are so blinded by their hatred, when they're so blinded by their ego, that they refuse. Not that they fail, they refuse to see. They refuse to see. And that is the definition of kufr, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Fath, يُعْجِبُ الزُّرَّاعَ لِيَغِيظَ بِهِمُ الْكُفَّارِ. Al-kuffar, al-kafir in the Arabic language is the farmer, is the peasant that takes the seed, digs the earth, puts it and covers it up. That's the meaning of kufr, cover in English, right? Essentially the root of cover is kufr from the Arabic language, right? The verb cover in Latin comes from the Arabic language kafar, which is to cover something up. They know the truth, but they cover it up with misinformation. Cover it up so that nobody sees it, right? So but don't call any farmer kafir, because I think, Arabs will take offense to that. Even though linguistically speaking, the farmer was always called kafir in pre-Islamic Arabia because they cover up the seed in the soil. Okay, so a little grammatical thing here. إِذَا كُنَّا عِظَامًا نَخِرَةً 11. Even though we become a crumbling bones, now we're being put back together, and we're gonna go back to our lives. So fascinating. The most interesting thing ever, as opposed to acknowledging, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to bring them to account. And then we go into the discussion on Musa alayhi salam. And this is quite fascinating because again, if you look at the story of Musa, it's the oft repeated story in the Quran. And I've always said this. Why? Because we should see ourselves in the story of the Hebrews. We should see ourselves in Bani Israel. And we should try to understand the mistakes and try to understand the flaws. And try to understand how they, were demoted from God's chosen people, into a struggling nation. Okay? And it's not viable and it's not valid for any of us to assume a general statement about an entire group anyway. Okay, that's statistically erroneous. And we've talked about that before. And so to assume that every single person in one particular group is bad or somehow genetically determined to act a certain way, that goes against logic and reason. All right. However, the story of the Hebrews has tremendous parallels that are important for us to know. This is why, think of it this way. Musa alayhi salam was sent to the people of Egypt, both the Egyptians and the Hebrews. Okay? With the Hebrews, he had one particular mission, one particular mandate, and with the Egyptians, he had a different mandate. In the Bible, it almost suggests that the mission of Musa was just racially driven. He's a Hebrew. He discovers that he is Hebrew, so he goes back to Pharaoh, who in the biblical account is actually his brother, right, and not his father. And he says, let my people go. So, the struggle ensues, and God punishes the people of Egypt because their king refuses. And that's when, the exodus happens overnight and mission accomplished, basically. But the Quranic narrative is that Musa alayhi salam was a prophet of God. And he was sent to all Egyptians, Hebrews and natives. And that so many Egyptians followed him. In fact, the Quran talks about, Mu'minu Ali Fir'aun, who by all commentators was actually the cousin of Pharaoh. He was a member of the royal family. And that Musa alayhi salam had a tremendous following, in the Egyptian community. And Yusuf alayhi salam has a tremendous following as well. Those were great prophets of God that preached Islam to their people, okay, regardless of who those people were. And so we should see ourselves in the story of the Hebrews and the story of Bani Israel and learn from the mistakes that were committed that held those people back, right? As opposed to, saying off-color, anti-Semitic things, like many Muslims do, which causes us to miss the point of why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeated the story over 30 times in the Quran, right? And so this is an incredible story, one of the best ever told, that starts with Musa alayhi salam, being separated from his mother, being placed in the cradle, and then picked up by Pharaoh, growing up in the house of Pharaoh, treated like he's a prince of Egypt, grew up to be royalty, with tremendous privilege and access to resources. And then one day it dawns on him and he realizes by contact with some Hebrews and he sees his sister and his brother and so forth, oh my God, I am not a Pharaoh, I'm actually a Hebrew. And that's, gradually in the midst of his emotional outburst, he picks a fight with a guy, he takes a swing at him and he kills him, which prompted him to flee the country. Even though, in the Bible it says that Pharaoh was ready to forgive him because, they thought of him as one of their own. But, his morality would not accept that. So he flees to Nineveh and he lives there, he gets married, and then he yearns to see his mother. His blood mother had already passed away, but his mom, Asiya, the wife of Pharaoh that raised him, he misses her. So he wants to come back to Egypt, this time with his wife and his kids in order to see his mom, his adopted mom. And then what happens on the way to Egypt? He encounters, Jibreel alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commissions him as a prophet. And now, even though he was on his way to Egypt anyway, there's that added responsibility. Now he needs to go and confront either his dad or, his either Pharaoh or his son. And then he goes to Egypt and he tries to talk to Pharaoh, and then the whole encounter with the sorcerers, right? And then they accept the message. By the way, were the sorcerers Egyptian or Hebrew? They were Egyptian, right? They were very, very high, members of society, but they again accepted the message of Musa alayhi salam, and they were executed as a result. And then the 9 ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the curses come down, upon the people of Egypt, and then the Exodus takes place. Pharaoh, follows them with his army, and now they're basically stuck. This is like a pincer situation where, the Hebrews are right here, the Suez Gulf is right there, and the army of the Pharaoh is behind them. The Hebrews come to Musa alayhi salam, and he say, "Udhina min qabli an ta'tiyana wa min ba'di ma ji'tana." Yeah, Musa, we struggled before you came, and here we are still struggling after you came. Okay, it's not the 2 million people said that in one voice. It's a few people that complained about this, right? And then وَقَالَ أَصْحَابُ مُوسَى إِنَّا لَمُدْرَكُونَ. The followers of Musa said, "Oh my God, Pharaoh caught up with us. That's it. It's the end. They're going to destroy us." And that is when Musa alayhi salam said his incredible statement, قَالَ كَلَّا إِنَّ مَعِيَ رَبِّي سَيَهْدِينَ. No, the Lord is with me and He will guide us. He'll get us out of this. Guys, don't worry. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired him to take the staff, point the staff at the sea, and the water splits. Okay, he didn't know what was going to happen. God told him, point the staff at the sea. Point the staff at the sea. I don't know what's going to happen, right? And then the miracle happened. The Exodus was adjudicated. They crossed to the other side, and Pharaoh was punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. See, it took me like 10 minutes to just summarize the story. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you the concentrated version of that story literally in about 11 ayat, right? See, ayah number 15 all the way to 26. And if you look at these verses, long or short, it's the shortest verses in the Quran. How did this happen? Like literally, how do you describe something so detailed, so meticulously in only 11 ayat? Just the absolute incredible power of the Quran. Subhanallah. Why was this mentioned here? Why, of all the stories of the prophets, why the story of Musa alayhi salam in particular mentioned in a surah that is about resurrection, that is about al-ba'th? I guess that is the most important question that we need to answer. And in a nutshell, the reason Pharaoh did what he did is that he thought that he was immortal. In fact, look at ayah number 24. What is he saying? فَقَالَ أَنَا رَبُّكُمُ الْأَعْلَى. I am your supreme Lord. This is not an average king who just wanted blind obedience from his people. He wanted to establish and erect himself as an alternative to God. Right? I am your Lord, worship me. I mean, it's not unusual for Egyptian kings to do that. They're kind of still doing that to the present day, right? Worship me at the expense of anything else, right? But the only reason he did this is because, there is a part of him that thought he was immortal. And you think that you're immortal when the idea of resurrection is removed from your head, okay? Only when you believe in al-ba'th, resurrection, that you realize your own mortality and you act accordingly. You may still be a tyrant, but you know that one day you're going to die, and you try to get by without much harm. But this guy truly thought that he was immortal, and he says, "Ana rabbukumul a'la," not any Lord of yours. I'm your supreme Lord, right? Subhanallah. And so it is precisely because he thought that when people lose their sense of mortality, the type of things that they are capable of doing would be absolutely unimaginable. Once you lose your sense of mortality, once you take for granted life of this world, and you act like you believe you live forever, the types of things that people are capable of doing would be utterly utterly unimaginable. So what really checks human behavior is mortality. Okay, what keeps us, going on? Even atheists, most atheists are very moral people. They act in a moral fashion because they understand their own mortality. I mean, this life is going to be very short anyway. And I actually do believe that every atheist, deep inside, they're thinking, you know what, there's still a slight possibility that God exists. Because it cannot be ruled out completely. Otherwise, I would have had an evidence that God doesn't exist. And I cannot generate such evidence. People of faith cannot give evidence that God exists, but atheists cannot do that either. Okay? And so there's always an assumption that, okay, it's still possible. I'm not saying that it's not possible. Therefore, I am better off acting a little bit morally because you know what? You never know. Right? And so otherwise, I don't have any explanation as to why someone who doesn't believe in God, acts in a moral fashion. I was asked this question before at a forum, I think that the Granite Bay High School kids organized, a couple of years ago, and they were asking me, is morality possible without God? And I said, if the question is whether or not people who reject God can be moral, the answer is yes. People who reject God can still be moral. But if the question is, can morality exist in a universe that does not have a God, the answer would be no. Because who would be the source of that objective morality then? Right? If not God, then where did it come from? Okay? There would be no objective morality in a world that does not have a God. But people who do not believe in God can still act in a moral fashion because, they're still the voice in the back of the head. But it's not just Pharaoh's fault, by the way. Ayah number 24 tells you that Pharaoh said, "Ana rabbukumul a'la." Okay, I am your supreme Lord. In other ayat in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْتَخَفَّ قَوْمَهُ فَأَطَاعُوهُ. He took his people lightly and they obeyed him. Tyrants are tyrants not just because they're tyrants because their people enabled them and allowed them to be tyrants because they did not do anything about it. Okay? The sorcerers taught us that it is better to live a life of honor, even if short, than to live a life of indignity, a life of slavery and humiliation, even if it's long. Right? They would rather give their own lives than be enslaved by another mortal being. Right? And so, it teaches a bit of a lesson here. And that is, as we all witnessed the unfolding of erosion of American democracy, right before our own very eyes, every single day, we can lament and complain, but we can also do something about it, right? And I always say that if Muslims don't take the forefront of activism and social justice and standing up for what is good and what is right and what is beautiful, then who else is going to do that, all right? You technically are the last men and women standing. Everyone else has capitulated. They've given up, right? They've accepted the tidal waves of popular culture. And it's just us that still have the audacity to say that which is right at our own expense sometimes. They attack us, they say all kinds of things, they mock us. One of my students, may Allah bless him, is becoming like, some sort of a TikTok star now. Because, this is why this stuff happens. There's a huge silent majority out there, but they don't want to talk. Because anything they say, they get canceled so effectively, right? So this, brother is now, mashallah, has like 200,000 followers or something. And I'm assuming that by TikTok terms, that's a lot, right? I'm not on TikTok, inshallah won't be. But he is, and all he does is that he develops sound arguments against atheism, sound arguments against, transgenderism, sound arguments against homosexuality, against consumerism, all the ailments of American society. He's, the Jews, the Mormons, the evangelicals, they're following him. So now you have a Muslim that is basically becoming sort of like, this knight in shining armor for some of the more dominant religious groups in America. Again, this is just a microcosm of what could be achieved if we are brave enough. If people have the fortitude to do what is right, okay? Because the field is level for you, literally. There's no one else out there that is doing anything meaningful. The minute you step in and do the right thing, you'll be amazed, from the response. So, Ana Rabbukumul A'la does not happen in vacuum. It happens when people enable it to happen, right? You only allow a tyrant becomes a tyrant because we've allowed a tyrant to be a tyrant, right? Now let me take you to, so this was the discussion on Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun, but I want to take you to the ayah that follows right after, 27, and starts with a question, أَأَنْتُمْ أَشَدُّ خَلْقًا أَمِ السَّمَاءِ Are you more difficult to create or recreate than the universe? So if you are denying the idea of resurrection, why do we deny the idea of resurrection? Well, not us, that is, but why is it that an atheist would deny the idea of resurrection? Because they base all of their assumptions on empirical observation. And empirical observation says when things die, they don't come back together. Because there is nothing else to the human being than the basic components that make who we are. There's no soul, there's no spirit for them. It's just stardust, as we always say. All right? And based on empirical observation, we've never seen anything that died that came back to existence, right? Empirically, that is true. Okay? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to this argument in the most philosophical fashion. He says, basically, everything that you see in the universe was caused by prior events, and we've never seen anything that died and then came back to life, right? Right. However, what about the original event by which the universe was caused? What is the prior event to that? There's nothing that caused it. Yet it came to existence. And if the original event by which the universe came to existence had no cause, at least no empirical cause of yours, then how do you explain that then? Was that a metaphysical event? Was that magic? And if it is not magic, then you would have to yield and say there must be an uncaused cause that caused it. This is logic. This is not, I'm not using religion. This is just simple logic. All right? And so you are so concerned about the idea of dying and then, being resurrected, the idea of ba'ath, because it goes against your empirical observations. Well, did your empirical observation explain to you how the universe itself came to existence? Do you think that recreating you is harder or more difficult for God than bringing the universe out of nothing? See the argument here? This is the most incredible thing. Again, if you don't have in mind the theme of the surah, you will read this and then you won't pay attention to what is being said. But once you have an understanding of the theme, you'll be able to uncover the secrets of those ayat. أَأَنْتُمْ أَشَدُّ خَلْقًا أَمِ السَّمَاءُ بَنَاهَا. This is ayah number 27. O men, or human beings, are you more difficult to recreate than the universe or than heaven, which was built? Okay? Who caused the first event? It's not your empirical observations. There's no explanation except metaphysical ones for something like that. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes into, an investigative inquiry into the universe and its events and, its orbits and the constellations and the cosmic systems and the sun and the earth and everything like that, inviting you to see how it is today. So why is it, if Allah is the one that brought all this to existence with no ingredients, there was no available ingredients for Him, be it is, He put it all back, He put it all together, why is it difficult for Him to resurrect you one day, right? Number 33, which is the conclusion of this section, I find to be absolutely fascinating. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَتَاعًا لَكُمْ وَلِأَنْعَامِكُمْ. So He keeps talking about how functional the universe is and how beautiful it is and how it yields fruit and vegetables and grain and animals and cattle and livestock, and that is basically has water and has all the things that we need. And then he says مَتَاعًا لَكُمْ وَلِأَنْعَامِكُمْ. So the section basically gives you some intrigue about the original event that was not caused by empirical observation. And then he tells you at the very end of that section, مَتَاعًا لَكُمْ وَلِأَنْعَامِكُمْ. This is ayah number 33. All this is as means of livelihood for you and your animals. Enjoyment for you and your animals. So if the first one talks about cause, the last one talks about what? What does this say about the universe? Which statement is this about the universe? It says that this is the purpose of it. The purpose is for it to be mata'an lakum. In one section, two arguments for God were made. The causal argument that I mentioned, they call it the cosmological argument, and the argument from purpose, that the universe is designed to achieve the purposes of man. It's designed to help you with the right amount of oxygen and the right proportions and the right amount of water and everything, the right amount of gravity and all of that, that it is designed for you, for your own purposes. The margins of life were so meticulously designed in the universe. Right? So again, in response to atheists who would say, well, there is no empirical precedence that something that died would come to existence again. Well, look at the universe in which you live. On the one hand, it was not caused by some empirical event either, yet it was caused. Number two, it is designed as a perfect fit for your needs. Serves all of your purposes. How can this not be thought through? Ayah number 34, فَإِذَا جَاءَتِ الطَّامَّةُ الْكُبْرَى. The overwhelming event. Only then. Not even resurrection made them realize what's going on. Only when الطَّامَّةُ الْكُبْرَى, ayah number 34, only when this overwhelming event comes to pass that they will realize, oh shoot, now I'm standing now here with billions of other human beings. There is no way. There is no way that I'm going back to earth at this point. Right? Something happens. This is not time and space as I know them. This is a different place, a different story right here. That's when they will realize what's going on. That's when they'll give heed. 37 and 38. فَأَمَّا مَنْ طَغَى, transgressed the bounds, آثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا, preferred the life of this world. These are the basic qualities, of people that were going to hellfire. All right? So they transgress all bounds. So there is a malicious, sinister intent involved. These are not ignorant people or struggling to search for the truth, right? Tagha means committed tughyan, transgressions, acts of tyranny. All right? وَآثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا, and they gave credence and they gave precedence to the life of this world at the expense of anything and everything else. فَإِنَّ الْجَحِيمَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى, hellfire will be their abode. By contrast, ayah number 40 tells you about the qualities of those who will go to Jannah. مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ, they stood in awe of their sustainer''s presence. وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى, and held back his self from base desires. Right? So you stand in awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or you stand in fear perhaps because khafa, from khawf, fear. You stand in fear of Allah and His presence, and you hold yourself back from base desires. فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى, Jannah will truly be their goal. And we're almost done here. Ayah number 42, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ السَّاعَةِ, The third and last question in the surah. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ السَّاعَةِ أَيَّانَ مُرْسَاهَا. They will ask you, O Prophet, about the last hour. When will it come to pass? Mockingly. Oh, you say that there is a Yawmul Qiyamah? Okay, when will it happen? Tell us. A man actually came to Rasulullah ﷺ and asked him this exact question, but he was Muslim, and he said, Ya Rasulullah, tell me about the hour. When will the hour be? Mata as-sa'a. So the Messenger ﷺ said, ماذا أعددت لها? What have you prepared for it? The question is not when. I'll tell you why Allah is not going to answer that question. The question should be, what have you prepared for the hour? What have you prepared for the last hour? So the man said, Ya Rasulullah, la shay. Nothing much. غير أني أحب الله ورسوله. Except that I love Allah and His Messenger. Truly, honest to God. That is my only preparation. I have a lot of love for Allah and His Messenger. And Rasulullah said, يُحْشَرُ الْمَرْءُ مَعَ مَنْ يُحِبُّ. You will be with whom you love on the Day of Judgment. Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, was the narrator of the hadith, said, فَوَاللَّهِ, I swear by Allah, there is nothing that made me happier on that day. There's nothing that made me happier since I became Muslim than that hadith of Rasulullah. From the day I became Muslim, I wasn't happier than hearing this from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the simple act of love for Allah and Rasulullah can actually suffice for you to go to Jannah. Now, I said earlier that it is not possible for us to know the last hour. And a lot of people will say, yeah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept that as a secret, or kept that hidden in ilmul ghayb, in the knowledge beyond man's perception, to keep the excitement. Because if we knew when the Day of Judgment is coming, then everyone is just going to get ready for it, and it's not a test really. Okay, it's the difference between your teacher telling you next Monday is going to be your exam versus you better study because there's going to be a pop quiz anytime. Which one is more intense? Right? And so, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, oh, your pop quiz may happen anytime, that, it creates a sense of intensity and people are more keen to do, make better choices. But I also feel that it's not possible for us to understand when the final hour will be, because again, the human mind operates in the space-time dimension. We only operate based on the data that we experience in the physical world, the data that occupies space, where time passes, hours, days, and months, and years. Okay? The last hour does not follow any of those rules. How do you determine a time for something that does not have a time? How do you determine a place for something that does not have a place? Okay? And how would that be communicated to the human mind? My son the other night was also asking me, we were sitting in the backyard, and he was asking me about eternity in Jannah. And he was asking me about how can I be sure that I'm not going to get bored? It's a good question, right? Because it's doing the same thing over and over again. I mean, even if I go through all the pleasures, eventually I'll get through everything, and then I'll be like, what else? So I said, you're still making a huge mistake. He said, what? He said, you're still accounting for time. You're still saying that time is passing. People get bored because time passes. What if time doesn't pass? She said, what do you mean? Like we're just standing there? I was like, I can't answer that question because we've never lived in a universe where there's no space and time, right? But the afterlife exists in a domain where space and time don't play any role. And so concepts like eternity and boredom and khalidina fiha and all this, this applies to our spatial and temporal experience, but it does not apply to Jannah. It's like, but I don't understand how we exist without time and space. So neither do I. We've never experienced it, but that's the exciting part. You can stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask him these questions. And then he would say, okay, what about before God created the universe? What was he doing? I was like, you're still making the same mistake. You're assuming that time is passing for God, therefore he's doing something to occupy the time. He's like, this is way too complicated for me. I said, yes, it is, and that's why it's super exciting. One day you stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you ask him all these questions, but then your mind will be equipped then to receive the answer. All right? 46, كَأَنَّهُمْ يَوْمَ يَرَوْنَهَا لَمْ يَلْبَثُوا إِلَّا عَشِيَّةً أَوْ ضُحَاهَا. See, this is a direct reference to what I was saying right now. On that day, the day of judgment, when they behold it, as if they had lived in this world no longer than one evening or an ending or part of an evening, right? So once you experience the day of judgment with its timelessness, suddenly you realize that the time that you've spent on earth is negligible because it's a finite amount compared to the infinity of the afterlife. It will feel like it was nothing, right? So that explains a lot. When people stand on the day of judgment and they will ask the question to each other, قالوا كم لبثتم في الأرض عدد سنين. How much time did we spend on earth? قالوا لبثنا يوما أو بعض يوم فاسأل العادين. We only spent like a day or a little shorter than a day. Ask whoever was counting. Okay, well, that's exactly the point, is that because time passes on this earth, it can be counted, but once it's compared with timelessness, it's almost like you're comparing a finite value to an infinite value, which basically makes it, negligible, like as if it doesn't exist. So life on earth will literally feel like zero compared to the afterlife, mathematically speaking. So that was basically some thoughts I wanted to share with you guys about Surat al-Nazi'at, and I'll be more than happy, inshallah, to take your questions before we pray Salat al-Maghrib together. Yes. Yeah, and that's why I said earlier that the nature of those objects is less relevant than the feeling in the heart that is produced by them and by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taking an oath upon them. Classical commentators, I think, spend a lot of time trying to understand the specifics and the particulars. And sometimes I feel like we get lost in the trees and forget the forest. There's a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to keep those words a little bit vague. There's a reason why. Would have been he mentioned al-malaika in the Quran before. He mentioned the stars in the Quran before. Why is he not saying it explicitly? Yeah, and so I agree with you that we should not, reach any finality about the meanings when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not do that. It will all be just conjecture at this point. Yes.
Because my son also one time, he's a skinny guy, so he said, I don't enjoy the food, so can I play PlayStation over?
You mean in Jannah?
In Jannah.
Okay.
Because he said everything is about food, fakir fruits and everything. I don't enjoy the food. So he said something you cannot imagine. I told him, yeah, food on coefficient, that means every single day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will create something else.
The hadith in Bukhari always resolves this matter, by the way. In Jannah are things that no eyes had ever seen, no ears had ever heard of, and no mind had ever conceived. So if you've conceived it, then it's not in Jannah, right? A lot of people are going to be super disappointed. But, it's okay. It's okay to build the excitement, but always know in your heart of hearts that what Jannah has to offer is not like anything we've experienced in this dunya. Yeah. Yes?
Question about resurrection, because most of people asking that life after mouth is going to exist or not. And my point is, or question is there any existence according to Islamic theory before this life? Like we came to the earth before that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had some kind of knowledge about human being existence.
Yes.
Like we came to this life, go back and resurrect.
So the question is, is there any Quranic or Islamic account as to what happened before life? So we know that the Day of Judgment happens, in the afterlife, but was there a before life? And the answer is yes. I mean, Surah Al-A'raf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explicitly talks about how when we were still souls, and He made us all testify, وإذ أخذ ربك من بني آدم من ظهورهم ذريتهم وأشهدهم على أنفسهم ألست بربكم قالوا بلى شهدنا أن تقولوا يوم القيامة إنا كنا عن هذا غافلين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought forth all the sons and daughters of Adam when they were still a soul. They were not humans in the sense of a physical body yet. And He made them testify, am I not your Lord? And they said, indeed you are. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to them, lest on the Day of Judgment you say, of this we were unaware. So He ingrained it in us, not in our DNA. DNA is still part of the physical body. We talk about DNA like it's an indispensable part of our souls, right? It's not. This is still your physical body. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ingrained it in your soul, in the very makeup of your being, that He is your Lord. That's the nagging voice in the back of the head that always leads you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that you can never deny the idea of God or the existence of God, because it's your fitrah. Okay? And so the scholars basically say that before life we were in those sort of like receptacles or reservoirs of souls in the divine realm, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us one after the other to this earth to acquire the physical body and start the painful journey, basically. Questions? Going once? Going twice? All right, you guys. Jazakallah khair. Next week is going to be the day of Arafah, Friday night. So we don't have Tafseerah, inshallah, next week because it's going to be preparing for Eid and stuff like that. But we will resume after, inshallah ta'ala. جزاكم الله خير سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر الإنسان في خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خير. We'll pray inshallah in just a couple of minutes. So please get ready for Salat al-Maghrib. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Yes.
The fifth surah, according to Revelation, is Surah